I am Kimberly Wickert with the University of Kentucky Human Development Institute and Retain Kentucky. And today we are sharing To With or Not To With, answering all your questions about respectful language and disability. My visual description is that I am a mid-career white female with blonde, straight, shoulder-length hair, glasses. Today I'm wearing a black sweater with a white collar, and I have a blue Retain virtual background. We'll go ahead and get our slides moving. And I do want to share with you our disclaimer here that the information we share may not necessarily reflect the views of Employment First Council, University of Kentucky Human Development Institute, although we make every attempt to provide accessible, accurate, and current information. We are not able to guarantee that. Let's go ahead and look at next month's employer seminar series, where we are going to learn how employers can recruit workers through the Coalition for Workforce Diversity. And Kitty Zachary and Susan Brown from the Coalition for Workforce Diversity are going to be our subject matter experts, and it will be on December 18th from noon to 12:45. I will also put this information in the chat. And let's just a reminder that if you have someone who you think may be eligible for Retain Kentucky, they need to live anywhere in Kentucky, either be currently employed or have worked in the last 12 months, and their injury or reason for their inability to work must not be work-related. I'm also going to put this information in the chat where you can reach us if you know somebody who is may be eligible for our services, how you can contact us via email at retain@uky.edu or our website, kyretain.org. I just want to remind you that you can turn on your captions or turn them off in the bottom toolbar. We will be sending out the slide deck as well as a certificate of attendance. Give us about a week to do so to anybody who attended today. And then lastly, before I turn it over to Bev and Laura, who will be introducing themselves, that if you have questions, feel free to put those in the chat or the Q&A, and I will monitor those as we go along. So with that, I would like to say thank you very much to Bev Harp and Laura Butler for joining us today. I've had the opportunity to see this presentation in September at APSE and last month at Kentucky Rehab Association. And as I shared with them a few minutes ago, every time I get more takeaways. There's a lot of content. So I'm going to let you get started. Thank you so much for joining us.
Thanks, Kimberly. My name is Laura Butler. I work at the Human Development Institute, University of Kentucky. I am a Gen X woman with shoulder length brown hair. I'm wearing glasses and a tan sweater today and have a blurred background. Bev, do you want to introduce yourself?
Sure, I like the way you did that. So I'll say that I'm a boomer aged person with very short hair and glasses. I'm a white person and I use she, her pronouns. I work for the Human Development Institute and am the project director for Innovative Supports for Autistic Workers.
All right, and as mentioned, this presentation is called To With or Not To With. So hopefully we'll answer or at least most of your disability questions. Can you go back to the other slide real quick, Bev? Sorry. So I just wanted to point out the caption on the photo that Bev put up here. It says, "Alas, a head with deadness." And so we'll get into what that means a little bit more, but just wanted to point that out in case people didn't see it. Okay, thanks. So we're going to talk about why language is important when you're talking about a person's disability, the differences between person first and identity first language, some problematic language, and what to do when you don't quite get it right. So the reason we're talking about this is because basically it just shows a person respect when you use the language that they prefer when talking about their disability. And so that's going to help build a relationship. If you're working with a person and you're providing them services, it helps build that relationship. It also helps empower them to make sure that other people are going to use the language that they prefer. So the comic here is from our friend and colleague Erin Fitzgerald, and she goes a girl named Earl, the Spectrum comic. And what it says is, so what kinds of resources are currently available in the area for incredible credenzas? And the person working there says, actually, the appropriate term is credenza with incredibility. And so the bottom says, the caption says, credentialized support planning meeting. So it's, you know, that's like the previous example with the head in this one. It seems like kind of a silly example, but it just kind of highlights how sometimes we can get weird with language, right? Okay, so person first language. If you've been to school and you learned anything about disability, you probably learned about person first language. I did in graduate school. We talked about it a lot. We were required to use it. It came about, first started talking about it in the 1960s. You started in the late 80s, early 90s, seeing it in regulations and legislation. The Affordable Housing Act in 1989 moved from handicapped individuals to person with a disability. Same with Education for All Handicapped Children was changed to what we now know as IDEA, Individuals with Disabilities Education Act. And also in 1992, TASH adopted people with disabilities. And so the National Institute of Health defines person first language is a way to emphasize the person and view the disorder, disease, condition, or disability as only one part of the whole person. So describing what the person has rather than what the person is. So it's meant to be respectful of the person and not looking at them through the lens of their disability. Next slide. So most people with most disabilities use person first language, and it's the type of language that you're most likely to see either in writing, in literature, just people generally talking about disability. They're going to put the person first. So a person with Down syndrome, a woman with cerebral palsy, an individual with a spinal cord injury. These are this is the way we're used to seeing disability referred to, or person with a disability referred to, in spaces that are meant to be respectful. So we all know, anybody with a disability knows, anybody who's thought about it knows that there's a lot of stigma and stereotypes that come along with the word disability, people that have disabilities, basically everything around disability. So person first language is meant to talk about the person first and the disability second, as just part of who they are. So identity first language is kind of the opposite in terms of the way the language is said. So some disability groups prefer identity first language. And a lot of these are groups that see their the disability and as part of their culture and part of their just who they are as a person in society, different things. So you're going to see that with the autistic community, deaf, and blind generally are the three main larger disability groups that prefer identity first language. So they also know that this is that disability is stigmatized, but they prefer to use identity first because it is very much a part of who they are. So they prefer to be an autistic woman, a deaf person. Most deaf people that I know who consider themselves to be part of the deaf community use the big D deaf when they're writing about their disability. So say a deaf person, a blind man. So they do. Ooh, that was fast. I can talk fast, but not that fast. So anyway, so in way back in the dark ages of 1991, Sinclair talked about why they like to think about autism in person first language. So autism isn't temporary. It's something that the person has always had and will always have. It's not negative. It's not like having cancer or having the flu or having a broken arm. And it's just part of the identity, just as much as a person's gender can be a part of their identity, their faith can be a part of their identity. It's not something that they're ashamed of. It's something that is just part of who they are. So they want to be an autistic woman or an autistic Christian. These are just who they are. And just to note, many in the deaf community don't see deafness as a disability. It's just their natural human condition. So within the blind community, there's these two counterpoints. This is an example. You'll find it in a lot of other disability communities as well. So I'll read them to you real quickly. So on one side, one argument is using the expression the blind child makes the disability the most important attribute about the child, while saying the child who is blind, takes the focus away from the ability, making the disability one descriptor. So making the child the center and that they happen to be blind as well. The other view on that is the belief that the word person must invariably precede the word blind to emphasize the fact that a blind person is first and foremost a person is totally unacceptable, resulting in the exact opposite of its purported aim. Since it is overly defensive, implies shame, and instead of true equality, and portrays the blind as touchy and belligerent. So one is saying the child is the most important part. We'll focus on that, not the fact that they're blind. The other saying there's nothing wrong with being blind. You shouldn't be ashamed of it. Let's put it front and center. So two different views. So think about where you might fall on that. And we're not saying either is right or wrong. It's just two different points of views. Next slide.
So, autistic people, like myself, have additional reasons sometimes for preferring identity first language. And the point here is that when you said that a person is with autism, it sounds very much like, okay, so they were a regular person, but then they have this thing that makes them different, which doesn't jibe with me as far as knowing that the brain is wired from birth or before birth to be different than a neurotypical brain. Autism just is. It is a way of being. It's not some kind of disease that attaches to people. So the with is problematic in giving the indication that, maybe if we're with this thing, then maybe we could be without this thing. And it keeps the attention on the idea of why somebody might have autism and what could be done about it, rather than just the simple fact that this is a person and that the way their brain is wired is currently called autistic. I don't want to see a world without autistic people in it. And when I hear about ending autism, that is the world that we're talking about. So while there is not a lot of this rhetoric going on currently, there has been in the past, and there certainly will be in the future. So it's just something to watch out for. And it is a very complicated issue. Autistic people have explained that autism isn't something that just affects one or two areas of life, or it is present in one or two or three ways you can observe. It's literally everything. Autism changes the way that I talk, walk, think, sleep, eat, literally everything. So that is something that I would say is a core part of identity, which is what a research subject here also said. And another one pointed out that it was condescending to him to hear a person first language, like people without disabilities needing to remind each other that people with disabilities are still people. Why are those reminders needed? If this is the attitude that we want to see, then why do we keep acting like it doesn't really exist? The idea that we're actually people and have the same rights as anyone else. Now, on the other hand, we are very aware that the language of first-person language was created by self-advocates, and honoring that legacy of people with intellectual disabilities who fought for that, who fought for a more respectful way of talking about their disability, that is important. And so when people say, oh, well, don't ever use person first language because that's definitely disrespectful, that's not true either. It depends on how much information do you have about this? What have you thought about the reasons why you would like to use person first or identity first? All of that sort of thing needs to be considered, because both sides of this issue are fighting hard for respect and against dehumanization. It's just that we have different perspectives on it. The same applies to the larger topic of people who have a disability versus being disabled, but this is a little bit different. And in our work, we're not as likely to run into a lot of people who are part of the disability rights or disability justice movements. Most people are not part of these movements, but these movements are important because these are the thought leaders. Okay, this is the direction that we are trying to move toward. The idea of disability as not only a medical condition or a deviation from the norm, but also as a culture that we belong to, a connectedness with other people with disabilities, an experience of facing marginalization and discrimination in society. That's all part of disability too. And when you think about it like that, it kind of shows why some of us prefer the social model of disability, which is that, say I have an impairment, that's a functional limitation, like, for example, not being able to speak. That is an impairment, not a disability. A barrier occurs, and the barrier in this case would be that most people are not open to different kinds of expression that isn't speaking. So that barrier creates the disability or disablement in my situation, where now I can't communicate with you. If we could both work a little bit and share pieces of each other's language, then maybe we could fit this together. But that's not the expectation. So therefore, we're disabled. Also, it's also very important to keep in mind individual preferences. These things that I'm telling you about what certain communities prefer, Laura showed you some statistics where people indicated what language they liked. There were still 15% of people who did want to be called an individual with autism, and those people matter too. And I should also note that when we talk about this, we are accounting for everyone who has in the past expressed an opinion about it. So people who haven't been asked, maybe people who are not online, maybe people who just do not have any interest in the political aspects of disability and don't care what you call them, those people matter too. So when we are dealing with a person or a person and their family or the family member, then we want to be sure that we use the language that is comfortable for those people. So always call the person by the terms that they use themselves. And if you're not sure, it's okay to ask, like, what words do you use to talk about your disability? And how would you like me to refer to it? So here's an example. Say you're a professional and you work with people with disability and you attend a meeting of the state's Advisory Council on Autism. And there you hear all the parents are saying a person with autism or an individual with autism. There are some professionals who say individual with autism spectrum disorder, and the self-advocates who have spoken have used the word autistic. You are a non-autistic professional and you want to say something during the public comments time, but you're not sure what language you should use. How can you navigate this without offending anyone or having people think that you're trying to discriminate against them? Well, normally you will defer to the words of self-advocates first, because these are the people who are most directly affected by what language does in the world. And I'm going to talk about that next and why this really matters. If the self-advocate is not present and parents are present, then you will use the word that the family members use. What the professional wants to call things, that comes last. What you think personally as a professional really shouldn't enter into it. And I think we all find that to be a difficult space to navigate, whether we have a disability or whether we have a family member with disability. We want to be able to communicate with each other in a respectful way. So I think that having these discussions openly and explaining why these things are important to each of us is really important. And when you're deciding what language you're going to use, think about power differentials. Think about, where is the power right now? Who gets to decide what language we use about which things usually? Is there something that you can do to rebalance that a little bit? So I'm going to try to be brief about this. This is my one of my special interests, language and how it works. So I wanted to introduce the Sapir-Whorf hypothesis, which is a very important idea in linguistics. And that is based on the studies of both of these linguists who found that language influences the way we think, and that people who speak different languages experience the world differently and think differently. So the words that we have available to us help us to think about things in more complicated ways. So if we know several words for a concept, then we're likely to be able to explore it more broadly than if we only know one word for that concept. Language itself holds a lot of power. The limits of my language mean the limits of my world, is what Wittgenstein said. But words are used to reinforce hierarchies and to tell us who is the boss and who is not. And they can easily portray some people as less important or even less human than others. And they let the world know how we see ourselves in the world. Limiting somebody's vocabulary can actually limit their ability to think. And this was perhaps what was attempted by the Department of Defense when, after a nuclear explosion at 3 Mile Island, they used words like rapid oxidization instead of fire. They called the explosion an energetic disassembly in the official documents. They didn't need to use the words that would be scary or uncomfortable for people. So this is just a quick demonstration of how that power works. So I'm going to talk to you about a rat. And suppose I bring in a rat and I show it to you. And the language that I use is that this is a rodent. The thought that goes with that is, oh, it's a small mammal. That's a neutral idea. Rodent is a neutral word. It's a scientific word, sort of. So the belief that might go with that, hearing about the rodent, is that I might want to learn more about the animals that share our world. On the other hand, if I come in with a rat and I start talking about it as a vermin or pest, these are very negative words, and that will cause your thought associations to go to disease, danger, and disgust, which might go along with the belief that we should avoid rats or even kill them. Not everybody feels that way about rats, though. What if I bring in a rat and let you know that this is my pet? Now it's framed as being cute and friendly, and the belief that goes with that is, oh, it's a reasonable thing to adopt a rat as a pet. This is someone that is loved by a person. We have the concept, the basic concept here of rat is embodied in just the rat itself. And the words that I use help to guide the thoughts that you're going to have about it, and later the beliefs that you might hold about rats. So just hearing this one rat lecture from one person is not going to influence you very much. But if everybody that you encounter is talking about rats as a pest or vermin, then you're very quickly going to see the viral effects of language. And both linguists and artists have long explored the idea of language as a virus in the way that it spreads. And one viral word that we have had to contend with is what we now call the R word. A shocking number of people are still using it. Hopefully they are mostly just in the adolescent population. When I hear an adult using it, I just really kind of lose hope. But what this word does is it creates negative realities for people with intellectual disability. When people hear over and over negative words about a situation, then they can't help but start to adopt those as beliefs. It gets in, and it creates more segregation, more exclusion. And in this case, the weapon that they used, the vaccine that they used against this virus, was a campaign to spread the word, to end the word that started in 2011. And it really did reduce definitely the number of times that I have to hear that word. Finally, I wanted to mention that there are pathologizing and medicalizing words that are just not helpful to use in a non-clinical setting. Because when I hear somebody talk about, say, this person has the following symptoms of autism, and they start to describe things that are my natural movements and my natural ways of relating to people and speaking, and I hear that those things are symptoms, that attempts to influence my thoughts and to turn my beliefs against myself, and to think that, oh, these things really are bad. They're not neutral things. Whereas the words characteristic and trait are neutral words that you can use to give the same information. Nonverbal is a word that a lot of people still use to indicate that someone doesn't speak or doesn't speak very much. The reason that the autistic community prefers non-speaking is that these are two very different concepts. Nonverbal means that you don't have language to describe the world you live in. If someone is not speaking and you haven't given them a full battery of tests that is absolutely and certainly valid and reliable, you don't really know whether or not they have language. What you do know is that they are not speaking. So non-speaking is the accurate word. The rest of this list, all kind of the same ideas. We don't use the words high and low functioning or levels like 1, 2, 3. If you use those in a clinical setting, that's one thing, but using them to express the experiences that autistic people have in the world, in social media and more casual settings, really is influencing people to think about autism in ways that are not helpful to autistic people. It is not helpful to people who are considered low functioning, that to have their abilities and their strengths denied and ignored, and it's not helpful to people who are considered high functioning to have their needs for support ignored, because on the surface everything looks okay. So pretty much every word on this list is in that same area of there's just a better way to say this, a less clinical way, a less judgmental way. So that's what we're looking for, neutrality. Laura, will you speak to us about a very special language?
Very special language. My fellow Gen Xers will recognize this Lisa Frank sticker. Okay, so we use a lot of special words, including the word special, to talk about people. But what if it was about us? So think about this scenario. You're a 30-year-old woman, you go to the doctor. Everyone there is talking to your spouse instead of you. They're talking to your spouse about you, around you, for you, all these things. So you finally get up in the middle of the appointment and leave. And so then you have a note in your file with the doctor in your chart that says that you have eloped. So it doesn't say, so that's me. So if this were me, it would mean I did something wrong. I did something that I shouldn't have done. So I'm labeled, it was labeled as eloping. Nothing about the fact that everyone else was being disrespectful or not treating me well, but that I did something that I shouldn't have done. And that's what happens a lot, right? It's if you know, you see this with elope, non-compliant, all these things, that really often just means that, you know, you got sick and tired of whatever the situation was and you weren't going to put up with it anymore. But everybody else isn't the problem, you're the problem.
Right, and Laura is allowed to just leave, but if I do the same thing, I might be eloping.
So this is just pointing out that this isn't just, you know, some radicals in the disability justice movement talking about getting rid of special words. The AP style book a few years ago now recommended that that journalists use that avoid using special needs and special education when they can, and refer because they are euphemistic and offensive to some people. So they suggest trying to talk about specifics. Instead of a special need, you can talk about you know, whatever the actual situation or need is. And it's often not the person's special need, it's the environment or society's special need, right? They are the ones that are not providing what that person needs that makes their needs special. It's not really that special, it's just they're not getting their needs met.
The other thing is that when we talk about special needs, we're not really talking about needs themselves. We're talking about the means that people use to meet those needs. So this is a chart that I made up that's about employment, and employee number 1 in the blue is non-autistic. Employee 2 in the square red is autistic. And we're going to look at what these people need in order to have a successful day at work. Each of them needs adequate nutrition and hydration. Employee 1 is more likely to have that need met. And the reason for that is that autistic people are likely to struggle with food and drinks, to have a very limited diet, and need extra support to make sure that we are healthy. Also, eating disorders are quite a bit more common in autistic than in non-autistic youth. A person needs to have had a good night's sleep. Well, Sleep disorders are also extremely common in autism. And it may be that a person needs to have their hours adjusted because of this at work. But the typical person who shows up is more likely to have had a good night's sleep. They may not have. These in this first column are not always going to be a yes. There's going to be no's mixed in there, but these yeses represent that there are not unreasonable barriers most of the time to these needs being met. A person needs to be out of pain and away from distress. This can be difficult when you have communication differences and interoception differences, which means understanding the needs of your body, understanding the communication that your body is telling you, I am tired, I am hungry, I am thirsty. We don't get those signals all the time. Many autistic people have to be reminded to eat. So we are less likely to have to be out of pain and out of distress. We're less likely to have a social support system. We are less likely to feel that we have the respect of our peers. And we are far less likely to find ourselves at work in a tolerable sensory environment. So while the needs are exactly the same, some needs are easier. Some people's need for sleep, for example, or for respect gets met regularly through the course of the day, and other people's does not. The problem with euphemisms is that we're trying to avoid saying something uncomfortable or unpleasant or something bad. Like, people don't like to use the word dead in some cultures, so they'll say something like, he's no longer with us. And if someone is fired, it might seem more gentle to say that they were let go or they're no longer working there. So when someone says that a person has special needs as a way of avoiding saying that they have a disability, that throws disability right down into that category with the fired and the dead. And I really don't feel that way about disability. Some people do, but I find that having some disability pride is absolutely necessary for surviving in a society that doesn't really want us around. So I hold on to the positive and neutral aspects of disability. But people do seem to have quite a lot of problems with the word itself, changing it to things like diff-ability or 100 different ways of separating the dis from the ability. We see that all over the place. Why is that?
Yeah, so we come up with all these words to avoid saying disability, right? We're twisting ourselves in knots, trying to not say the word disability. So some of them are words that we have more or less left behind, at least in, polite society. But you still hear them. We talked about the R word. And I see confined to a wheelchair a lot still. Challenged, these weird things like Bev was talking about, handicapable, differently abled, we already covered special needs. And individual has almost become kind of a euphemism, it seems like, instead of just saying, like, if you're talking about people in general, and then all of a sudden you're talking about a person with a disability, you'll switch to individual, which is weird. And also, kind of going way the other way and talking about a superpower or talking about all these wonderful, amazing things, the special powers that a person with a disability has. And so it's just weird that we try all these different ways to just not say the word disability. We can just say the word and it would save a lot of time and effort. and I don't know if we talk about this later, Bev, do we still have this in there about mental age? Okay, yeah, so there, right on track. So y'all, mental age. A 43-year-old person is never going to have the mental age of a 5-year-old. That person has lived for 43 years and has that experience. It may be different than the way they process it might be different than other 43-year-olds, but that's going to be pretty much the same as everyone. So saying they function at the level of a 9-year-old, or they have, you know, the emotional maturity of a teenager, or, you know, all these things. And so, what you're doing is kind of reinforcing that these people are not, first of all, whatever person they are, whether it's they're, you know, 12 or 42 or 85, that person deserves your respect for the person that they are and the years of experience that they have. And so when you're saying functions at the level of a 9-year-old, it's saying that they should be treated as a 9-year-old, that they don't deserve the rights and respects of an adult person if they're an adult. Instead, you might want to say that they need support for some things, or they might need things explained to them in a different way, or they might need extra processing time. So, you know, talking about mental age again, it can be very, as Ivan Nova Smith said, every adult has the right to grow up. So we know that this forever child thing is a problem with people with all disabilities. And no matter what the disability is, if it's a visible disability, people often automatically think that that person does not have the capacity to understand information for some reason, or you know, make decisions, and it's just weird. And it's goes back to, like Bev was talking about, the power of language. If you talk about an adult person as if they are a child, then that's what people are going to see, and that's what people are going to react to. Instead, we need to talk about, going back to what the Associated Press statement was. Let's be specific. Let's talk about what the actual supports the person needs are, instead of trying to compare it to what a child's level may be. All right, I've gone on about that.
All right. So sometimes new euphemisms pop up in an effort to make progress and to make things better. And one that I've noticed lately is that it's become really popular to refer to self-advocates as individuals with lived experience. And I tried to illustrate the problem with that with this Square Talk cartoon, where a square goes to the Square advocacy meeting and is surrounded by circles. One circle says, "We agree then that we will replace the word squares with shapes with lived experience of squareness." Yes, this is good that we have, this shows that we have a good reason to include them too. And the square is a little bit alarmed. Next, this month at the Square advocacy meeting, there are twice as many circles and still the one square. And the circles are saying things like, "I have lived experience as circle of a square. I experience squareness through my sibling, and I relate so well to my square clients. I experience nightmares because of them." One has lived research experience, and another wonders, well, you know, I might be square. You never know. So what this language has done is actually weakens the position of the self-advocates, as now other people can also use this wording of lived experience, and it makes perfect sense, and it is not, I believe, what was intended for the meaning of that to be, but it's how it's evolved. So sometimes when we try to make things better, we just really don't make it any better.
Okay.
So, okay, go ahead.
Okay. So there's some other things that ways we try to talk about it. people considered to have disabilities, a person who just happens to have a disability, again, someone who experiences disability, a person diagnosed with X. So these are things that are meant to be polite and respectful. I think that the people are saying them are trying to be that way. But you know, to Beth's point, what is it? Someone who experiences disability. I've read a lot about disability. I have friends and colleagues who have disabilities. I don't myself. So what does that experience mean? It's different. So what are you trying to get at? A person diagnosed with, to me, other people might think differently. To me, that means that they have this clinical label, whatever it is. But you know, it's almost like it's not being fully committed to. Like, I'm diagnosed with autism. Am I autistic? Like, those, to me, those say two very different things. And a person who just happens to have a disability. Most people who have disabilities have told me and would probably tell you that you don't just happen to have a disability. You have a disability and it impacts various parts of your life and potentially all parts of your life. So it's not something that you just happen to have. And I realize, you know, these are my perspectives, and I realize people are, like I said, often trying to be respectful and considerate when they say these things, but I'm not sure it always comes across that way.
Yeah, that always sounds to me like kind of downplaying the disability as if, well, they have a disability, but that's not really important. What I want you to know about them is this, which, you know, that's a legitimate approach. But as a person with a disability, I might feel differently about it. I might feel that I don't happen to have a disability. It is actually a very important part of my identity and experience.
And I think it also reinforces the, you know, that you shouldn't feel any kind of pride or sense um, of ownership in having a disability too, if you do have one. So
Right?
there's nothing wrong with saying the word disability, and there's nothing wrong with having a disability. It's just part of the human
Right. All
condition.
these kind of things kind of take the agency away from the person with the disability, don't they? Um, we talk about people considered to have disabilities. That's about what other people think, what other people say. A person diagnosed with is about what a clinician thinks. So it's kind of uncentering too.
So real quick, because we're running out of time, you'll see people with disabilities use, you know, some people with disability might use the word crip. If you saw Crip Camp, you saw that reclaimed language. Um, an autistic person, unless they also have another disability, it wouldn't typically be okay for them to use the word crip, although I see people using it in various ways. But that's the way I feel. I think that's the way, I know that's the way Beth feels because she made the slide. So, and then you see crazy, queer, freaks, geeks, all these things that people might also want to talk about. And it's words that I couldn't use, but if the person has these diagnoses that have typically been associated with these words, if they have these conditions, then if that's something that they want to use about themselves, you know, I'm not going to tell them not to. And it's kind of fighting back against things, right? You're reclaiming the language, and you see this in other groups as well. Reclaiming the language and taking ownership of it and making it a source of pride instead of the derogatory way. But again, only those people who identify that way are allowed to use that language. So what happens when you get it wrong? Long and the short of it, you're gonna get it wrong. It's gonna happen. You apologize and move on. You don't make it about you. You don't go over and over. Oh my God, I'm so sorry. I can't believe I did that. Blah, 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 blah. You don't ask for further details about it. Just, I'm sorry. I'll do better next time and move on and actually try to do better next time. It's that simple.
sometimes I added this on at the end here in case you run into situations where perhaps a professor tells you that you are not getting points for your paper because you didn't use person first language, or maybe your proposal got rejected from a conference because you didn't use the right language, or you had an article not accepted because it didn't. These are some references that you can use. Each one shows writers who are researchers and also hold these characteristics that they are either deaf, autistic, blind, or otherwise disabled, and explaining the preferences of their communities. So that could come in helpful for you, I hope. And we did promise to answer your questions about respectful language and disability, and it looks like we have just a few more minutes in case your question wasn't here.
Thank you both so much. We did have a couple comments. Terry said, thank you. I know now that I need to look over my presentations with my consumers and also employers that I'm working alongside of. Ryan had shared a couple other on the slide where you had some inappropriate terms. He said wheelchair bound and confined to a wheelchair. Elizabeth said, great resource. Thank you. So I just echo that. Thank you. As I mentioned, I've had the opportunity to hear you and see you both present this 3 times now, and I still learn every time. So we will send this slide deck out to everybody who attended today. This will also be available on our Retain Kentucky Media. So if you want to go back and listen to it again, then I think I probably will, or, you know, a few months from now, if you want to go listen to it because you want to, you know, recall some of that, it'll be there on Retain Kentucky Media. So thanks everybody for joining us today. Thank you so much, Bev and Laura, for your expertise. It was great.
Thank you all.
Have a great day.
Bye.
Bye.